Hi everybody, so today I'm going to go back over how to write a literary analysis for a quote. Today we're going to go back over the Masque of the Red Death. We talked about this opening quote, the opening passage, a lot in class. So today let's go back through and think about how would I write the literary analysis part of for this quote. So the first thing I ask you to do is go through the passage and text mark what you notice. We did do this in class, but I'll go through it quickly here. So the Red Death had long devastated the country. So I have this idea of the Red Death. And the Red Death has quite a bit of power. So let's highlight that in yellow because it really does stand out. Had long devastated the country. I have the idea of devastated. So that's word choice. So let's highlight that as diction. The country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. So again, this tells me quite a bit, but I have words like pestilence, fatal, and hideous. Blood was its avatar, and remember we talked about avatar being something like the embodiment, or it's more or less the emoji that you would use for to represent the Red Death. So blood was its avatar and its seal. Now the thing about avatar and its seal, the seal is interesting because it almost makes it seem like death is a warrior, death is a person. So I'm going to highlight that as possibly being, let's make that like that's personification, okay? The redness and the horror of blood. Well, this is obviously imagery, so we can move into imagery there. There were sharp pains, sudden dizziness, profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. So again, sharp pains, sudden dizziness, profuse bleeding at the pores. We've already talked about this, so I'm going through this very quickly, but there's more imagery. The scarlet stains upon the body. Again, imagery, scarlet stains, plus that's alliteration, especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from aid and from sympathy of his fellow man. So we have it pest ban. Okay, again, that's diction. And it shuts him out from the aid and sympathy of his fellow man. So again, I have this idea of language. He shuts him out. So that could be imagery or it could be diction from the aid and sympathy of his fellow man. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. So this gives me the time, the progress and termination. So this is an important quote. So I'm going to underline that section of it. But I have the word seizure in there. So the whole seizure, so again, that's diction. And a seizure is something that's particularly violent, and the disease is another word I want to highlight because, again, disease is repeated. And then termination. So all of these words lead to that idea that this is something particularly violent. So first thing I want to go through, I've text marked it, I've highlighted all my colors. Now I got to decide what it is. So I have imagery, I have diction, and I actually have personification, and more or less, and symbol. The Red Death is personified here, so I'm going to call it personification. Now, then what do I discover by focusing in on my highlights? What's the dominant impact of the devices on the mood, on the theme, on the reader? So remember, we've talked about the types of literary devices. Now we want to talk about what's the impact on the big elements of our story. And our big elements that we've been studying are character, conflict, setting, mood, and theme. So here, this is the opening passage, and as we talked about in class, this really sets the mood. So let's talk about atmosphere. So I'm going to make a note and say, this really goes to the atmosphere of the story. And then in my commentary, so that's note to self, that's what I'm going to focus on. So then in my story, I have to explain how the author uses imagery, diction, personification to develop a particular type of atmosphere. And I want to explain what the atmosphere is. So in my topic sentence, that's what I have to do. So I'm talking about in this passage, Poe's initial imagery and diction. And that's the subject. So remember we talked about we have to have a subject, an opinion, and a rationale. Okay, so what I'm writing about, the subject is Poe's initial imagery and diction. Okay, evokes or emphasizes, okay, or creates. So evokes is brings out or brings out a sense of terror in the reader, which that mirrors the terror of the victims. And how do I know that? Okay, because that initial imagery and diction, which evokes or brings out a sense of terror, by revealing the violence, okay, and we talked about this, the violence of this death and of the Red Death. Okay. So now I have my topic sentence. In this passage, Poe's initial imagery and diction, which is the subject about which I'm writing, evokes or brings out a sense of terror in the reader that mirrors the terror of the victims. Okay, that's my opinion. Remember now my rationale, by revealing the violence of the Red Death. And that rationale, that's my rationale. So now I have to prove that Poe's language, imagery and diction, creates that sense of terror in the reader. So I look at the language. First, I looked at devastated, pestilent, fatal, and hideous. I look at this idea of blood with its avatar. Okay, so then I want to start with that idea. So his imagery, his image of death as a warrior with blood, as its avatar, okay, and this warrior carrying a seal, I have to put that in quotes because it's in the quote, of horror, okay, makes it clear that humankind or people are in a bloody battle with death. Okay. Not only, so then I keep reading and I see this whole section here which is very descriptive. So not only does the disease inflict sharp pains. Notice I'm just pulling straight off of the author's words. And sudden dizziness and profuse bleeding. I know my sentence structure is a little off. I'll fix it. bleeding. The gruesomeness, because I don't want to keep repeating horror, gruesomeness of the illness makes the victim shut out from anyone who may provide them aid. Okay. Notice how much of Poe's words I use in my writing. Okay, so now I need to keep going, okay, and I want to add a bit of additional description here. So I still have this element to talk about. So so I want to make sure people understand how important all of this imagery is to setting of this mood. So all of these dark images that I see over here, and I've included here, this leaves the reader with the idea that no one can be saved. And notice, I don't have to keep saying this terrorizes the reader, because doesn't it add terror to us when we think about the idea that we can't escape this death, that no one can be saved? That's horrible in and of itself. So I don't have to keep repeating, it's terrible, it's horrifying. I've done it by just saying this leaves the reader with the idea that no one can be saved, okay? And then Poe adds to this mood, okay, by marking the termination, the progress and termination of the disease, taking only 30 minutes. And this really emphasizes. So Poe adds to this mood by marking the progress and termination of the disease takes only 30 minutes. Again, emphasizing the idea of impending doom. Now notice I'm doing this as I work through it with you, so I'm going to have some repetition of language. I don't want to keep saying emphasizing, but I'll come back and fix that language a little bit later. Okay, now the only thing I'm missing is I just need a conclusion to this. I have to write some form of conclusion. So again, I want to make sure that I'm thinking about, okay, what's my initial thing? So I'm saying that it brings out a sense of terror in the reader that mirrors the terror of the victims by revealing the violence of death. Okay, so this virulent disease, sweeping, how about if I say this, sweeping virulent disease, which offers no escape, sets the mood as ominous for the rest of the story. So now notice how my conclusion doesn't have to be really very, very long. It just has to clearly articulate everything I think, and I want to take it back to everything I've said in this section of my writing, and I need to take it back to the initial topic sentence. So I talked about the mood as terrifying. So I'm not repeating terrorizing. I'm saying this sweeping virulent disease, which offers no escape, okay, sets the mood as ominous for the rest of the story. And maybe I'll just put Poe's description of this sweeping virulent disease which offers no escape, sets the mood as ominous for the rest of the story. Now, there's probably some grammatical errors. That's okay. I can always go back and fix that. But notice how my ideas are very clear and I've analyzed every section of the passage.